Good afternoon, everybody. I'm James Pittman, co-founder here at Docketwise, and today's topic is operating a remote immigration practice. I have with me Roman Zelichenko, the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a digital marketing business that works with immigration lawyers for branding and marketing purposes. And he's also founder of Laborless, which is a tech company that seeks to automate LCA postings, basically labor condition application postings, when you're doing H-1B and other employment-based business visa cases. And we also have Chris Williams from Docketwise, who's engineering today's webinar. Let me introduce Roman. Roman, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this point.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thank you, James and Chris. Appreciate you setting this up, and thanks for everyone for being here. I'll do a quick intro, but of course, my big thing is during these webinars, please ask questions throughout. We obviously have a bunch of talking points, but to me, the most valuable part or the most valuable facet of a webinar is to have this sort of live interaction. So if I say something that piques your interest, you want me to dive in or try to dive into a particular topic, please. James, do you want folks to put it into the Q&A, I guess, right?
Yes, by all means. Any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we can take them as we go along.
Great. So as James said, I'm the co-founder of two businesses in the immigration space. For those of you who might not know me, I used to practice business immigration law, particularly focused on high volume H-1B, but also touched on a bunch of other types of cases. And was very involved in the immigration law space in law school when I was practicing. And I had an idea to start a tech company, Laborless, which automates LCA compliance. Sort of taking my experience as a lawyer, and I went and built that, and that launched in 2018, in early 2018. And as a bootstrapped startup, we were doing our own marketing. And I was a writer for a magazine for 10 years prior, all throughout like college and law school and practicing as a lawyer. And then I worked in tech, and I was always writing this whole time. And I started writing my own content, and that organically grew into GMI Rocket, which is, as James said, a digital marketing agency for the immigration space. Basically me marrying my sort of love and experience and marketing side with, of course, all my experience and knowledge about the immigration industry. So I've run both of these businesses remotely. I've been working remotely since 2018, sort of well before the pandemic. And prior to that, at my last full-time job, which was in a tech company, because I was learning how to run a tech company before launching my own, I was already consulting for remote only startups at the time. So 2016, 2017. So I've been, in the remote sort of workspace quite successfully for a number of years with companies big and small. So I really love this topic of kind of running a remote practice. And of course, while I don't practice actual immigration law anymore, a law firm is a business. And so what I'd like to share is some of the things that I've come across, tools, best practices, et cetera, that have been really helpful for me and helpful for a lot of the folks I work with now and have worked with in the past. And my hope is that it'll be helpful for you all as well.
Wow, what a great introduction, Roman. Thanks for that. And I also am just a huge fan of the idea of having a remote practice. Now that we've been through almost 2 years of the pandemic, and we've all sort of, at least a lot of people, maybe a majority of people, have had at least some taste of what it's like to work remotely. I think it's definitely becoming more common, and it remains to be seen, to what extent this presents a long-term trend for immigration lawyers. Hopefully, it sticks around even after the pandemic, because there's so many benefits. Let's talk about some of those benefits of running a remote immigration practice. So compared to getting up every day, going into an office where you have, sort of clients in the waiting room and a receptionist sitting there, if you're working from your home office, what are some of the benefits, Roman?
So this is an interesting question because I think some people might disagree. They love the kind of commute, and there's value in the commute. I will admit I used to read a lot more books because I had an hour train ride, to work and an hour train ride home. But I think outside of that, to me, again, relatively obvious, but just the idea that you have flexibility over where you're working in your home. You're not stuck in a cubicle, you're not stuck in an office. And of course, the idea that, not that you should roll out of bed and directly get to work, but the idea that you can save all that time on a commute. I mean, I live in Queens in New York, right? And I went to Brooklyn Law School, so it was in Brooklyn. And for most people, it's like, oh yeah, it's right in the same city. I think it's probably 7 miles away geographically. It, on a good day, it would take me an hour door to door. On a bad day, if something happens in, New York City subway, which happened all the time, it's like an hour 20, an hour 30 to get to work, or to get to school. And then I work, if you work in various parts of the city, and I hated that so much. And it was so nice for me to work remotely. It felt like such a treat. Obviously now that's sort of part of daily life, but from my perspective, getting that time back and then having the flexibility of, I'm not stuck here. I could go work at my desk where I'm at right now, or if I want to, I could sit on my bed, or I could sit in the kitchen, or what have you. Sometimes I sit on the floor, and like I'm stretching while also working. It sounds so silly, but I think that physicality of sort of that physical flexibility of your work space is, at least for me, it helps me focus, and it helps me kind of move the day along nicely. And I like that. It would be weird if I was in a corporate office and everyone's sitting at their desk and I'm like sprawled out on the floor behind my chair on my computer because I'm comfortable with it. They'd be like, no, Roman, please get up. You know what I mean? So I like that. I like having that. And I think it's an understated benefit, but to me, it's an attractive. Oh, and also it allows me to then say, okay, well, I don't want to work at home today. Let me go to a cafe, which many people do. If I'm just working on documents, I can go to a co-working space and, get the positive energy of that environment. So I love that flexibility. And I think as far as lawyers go, if you can, go for it. That's my suggestion always.
Yeah, I wanted to mention some of the benefits that I could think of was, first of all, you'd be saving a lot on transportation costs. You'd be gaining
Right.
back the time for commuting. You're eliminating the need to do things like, pack a lunch or worry about where you're going to go out and have lunch during the middle of the day. You're saving on food. And for people that have children or, other family members, they're taking care of it. It offers the opportunity to, it makes that easier to coordinate with your work life as well. So those are all huge benefits.
I'll share with you right now that we are actively getting this apartment renovated, and I would not be able to be here and help and move things around if I wasn't able to work from home. So you're right. I mean, work life is, I don't even know that you can say it's a balance. I think it's just a mesh. It's meshed together. And I think it's, to your point, if you're taking care of somebody or just having to deal with certain things, we should be able to do that. You shouldn't have to run to and from the office and ask for permission to leave to deal with a medical emergency or, something at home or with your kids. But yeah.
Absolutely, and you can do it in various ways. I mean, like you said, you can have something at a co-working space if you feel like you occasionally need a more structured sort of space. I mean, I think you should set up, if you're working at home, you should set up a particular area of your home that you have as sort of like your main location, and make it so that when you get in that space, you are away from distractions and everything else. But also, you can, rent an office as needed if you want something out external to your home, but you still don't have to get into a commercial lease. So that's.
I was going to ask for folks who are here. I'd love to know if any of you want to, I guess you can't comment here because we're in a webinar mode, but if you want to, in the Q&A, I'm really curious to see who here is either working remotely currently, is like thinking about it and is currently not working remotely, or maybe doesn't have plans to. I'm genuinely curious because I think, and I guess, yeah, if you can, I guess you could raise your hand, I suppose, right? And say that. So if folks want to raise their hands, that would be really cool to know. Thank you. I see some hands here. So let me make this clear. Raise your hand if you're working remotely now. That's then I'll know it that way. Cool. Yeah, and I'm curious because I want to see. Oh, I see some hands going down. So I guess some folks are maybe thinking about working remotely. Okay, Mark says I work from home exclusively. Okay, cool. So I just wanted to put that out there to see what who's doing what, so I know kind of who we're talking to here.
And another aspect of it is there's some immigration lawyers who, have multiple, they operate across a regional area. There's some people who operate and are based outside of the United States. So all of those, sort of dovetail with working remotely as well. If you want to operate from, the beach or in Malaysia or something, you can do that. And I've known a few people who have overseas locations. Another aspect of it is you're not limited in terms of the location of the people that you hire. So you have access to a larger talent pool, and you can hire people who are based other places. Why don't we talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively self-explanatory, but I think the one thing I would share there is that more and more, as far as I've seen, junior attorneys are open to this, and perhaps might even be be moved to work for a place that is remote first before a place that has them going into an office. So I think it absolutely opens up your talent pool. Nationally, I've talked to, perhaps even internationally, I've definitely spoken to a few attorneys who, some of whom live in large cities and have options to work at, great immigration firms in those cities, and they've opted to work at firms that have don't have an office, or maybe just allow their employees to work remotely around the country, and they've been so happy. This was early on, actually, during COVID. And I just remember asking this one particular attorney I have in mind, like, how is it? And they were like, it's great. And of course, we'll get to this, but it's great because they had the right technology already built into the sort of day-to-day workflow in terms of communication, document sharing, just all these things that, like, we are quite annoying if you don't have someone next to you to be able to answer a quick question, or to ask them how something works. So to be able to have documentation in a remote first environment is really important. But if you have that, and you have the basic tools, which I guess we'll get into shortly, I think you can access a larger talent pool and obviously ensure their success, versus having to get on the phone with them and troubleshooting things, and just the asynchronous conversations there causing pain. Instead of that, you could really be quite efficient.
Right, so I mean, some of the things, for example, suppose you're hiring a support staff, if you're hiring paralegals, legal assistants, or receptionists or something, you might be in a location where, you might be in a city where if you hired everyone locally, you would have certain costs, which might be rather large. But you might be able to shop around and find suitable people in a different location for a lower rate. So you can reduce your costs there. And that's huge. So let's talk about some of the tools that we're going to need to operate remotely. So first one that we want to talk about is web presence. And you need to have a web presence which is suitable for, in terms of what people are expecting to see in a website today. I mean, if you've had the same website since 2003, it's probably time for an upgrade. You want to really, there's tools available to do it yourself. If you're not comfortable doing it yourself, you definitely need to outsource it to people who are up to date in terms of what the user interface, user experience standards are for today. Roman, you want to talk about these things?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do see questions there, so I'll get to them right after we talk through this. So thanks everyone. Just keep getting keep putting questions to Q&A. We might not get to them that exact moment, but I promise we'll answer your questions. So this is, again, one of those really obvious things, but just to drill the point home, especially solos and small firms that have operated for maybe not too long, some for much longer. They may have built their site, a generic law firm website, and have grown through word of mouth, right? And they might not update their website because they frankly don't need to. And so for whatever reason, I mean, I just started working with one particular law firm who had grown quite a bit. And now this particular firm is losing a major client. And so the lawyer was like, I realized that I need to start marketing again actively because I was doing so well prior to this big client leaving. And I was looking at their website and it was just, it looks like it was from 2005. And it had generic language. It didn't, separate that particular lawyer from anyone else. There's really no marketing or branding on the site. And so to me, this person reached out to me from a marketing perspective. And I was like, listen, before we talk about your brand, before we talk about how to get new clients, whatever it might be, we should just create a good foundation for your web presence. You need to, if you're funneling people onto your site through talks, through articles, through, word of mouth, you want them to come to your website and know that and trust you through that website. That's their first impression of you. So I think to look modern it's relatively simple. If folks don't want to hire a web agency and they just want a simple presence, I mean, a website like Squarespace or Weebly or Wix, I mean, I've built a few websites on those platforms. They're really easy to do. They're not expensive either. And they have templates that you can use that are, modern. They look good. Obviously, you're going to put your logo and maybe change the colors around. But if any of you here are, have this like very text heavy website with like the scale, the scales up top, or, the Statue of Liberty or something like that, there's nothing wrong with it. No judgment about it, but it's sort of a played out brand. And so I think in today's virtual world where, you might have an older looking website, but you're charismatic and all that, and people come into your office and it's lovely and it's comforting. We don't have that anymore because many of us are remote, and we might not even if you do have an office, you might not be okay with clients coming in. So you need to make sure that your web office, which is really your, website, reflects those things about you. Yeah, I mean, I want to drill this point home, even though it's so obvious. Yes, you have to have a nice website, but really go in and sort of criticize, be hard on yourself a little bit, right? And say like, okay, I don't love this thing about my site, or I wish it had a little bit more of this or that, and work to do that. I would argue almost before you do anything else. Because that way you set up a really nice presence and can, once those people who are prospective clients of yours come to your site, they can really come away feeling comfortable and reach out to you and get business that way.
Excellent. So let's talk about emailing and email addresses and what are some of the best ways to set up the email for your firm, Roman?
Yeah, before we do that, just one quick note there. I want to answer Nadia's question. How do you manage your paralegals remotely? Any special software you can recommend? Well, I mean, obviously, as a Docketwise webinar, I would say that, I mean, if you all here are if your users are already great, if you're not, then, it's something for you to consider. But having a good case management system that has internal communication capabilities is really important. So you can manage paralegals through assigning them things in the system, tagging them and say, can you please confirm, please confirm this, please complete this, etc., and have that communication. And of course, then you don't have to follow up. You either know that they did it or did not do it based on sort of the audit trail of the tasks that they're completing. That's sort of direct. I also use a project management tool that's separate. It's called monday.com, just for tasks. I think it's an easy way for me personally to also get or assign things rather to people. And you can have sort of a workflow automation where if someone completes something, it then is automatically notifying someone else and things like that. So using tools like that, whether it's everything within Docketwise or maybe in addition to something like Docketwise, you might also use some other tools to, manage different tasks. If your paralegals are also tied into those tools, you can basically communicate that way without having to do the emails or calls or texts. You just add a paralegal to a case. You don't have to email and say, hey, here's your new case. Like, they get the notification, they get to work. In terms of communication, we'll get to that. But just as a quick note, I personally don't like email. And I've actually said to a number of people who start emailing me quite a bit, especially folks who start new threads for every single conversation because they don't want to keep replying to the previous thread. I always invite them to my Slack channel and say, please, let's talk on Slack. It's just much easier. It's more searchable, et cetera. So, to be able to assign certain tasks to a paralegal effectively using a tool to do that communication back and forth via something like Slack that is on one screen. You could search it, you can delete and edit text messages, et cetera, is really powerful. The last thing that I recently learned about from a tech company that I work with is they use Loom. Loom. It's a video recording platform, but they actually use that between team members to send them something. So imagine your paralegal is, working on something and you noticed an issue with it, you can probably, let's say you work on Google Docs, you can make edits in Google Docs. You can also share your screen and record yourself and say, hey, paralegal X, here are a couple of things I just wanted you to note, XYZ, I would change this here and there. And then also think about moving this, etc. 45 seconds a minute, you record the video and then you shoot it over to them. You shoot the link to the video over to them. And it's as if you're having that person-to-person conversation, but it's asynchronous. So they can get to it in 30 minutes when they're done with whatever they're doing. And, you don't have to set up a call. So tools like that make it, I think, much more easy and manageable to work with paralegals remotely. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, let me also add to that for Nadia. So some other practices you might consider is just having what we would call a stand-up call in the morning, every morning, where you get together with your team, and it can be 5 minutes. If there's things to discuss, it could be half an hour, and just sort of going over, what has happened since the last meeting and prioritizing what they want to focus on for that day, and just make that a regular practice every morning or a couple of days a week. And then, what Roman was talking about, those are all techniques, those are all tools. For example, Monday, for example, Slack, those are project management softwares and things that are used in other types of companies. And I don't know that, certainly there are law firms using Slack, but it should be more common than it is. The technologies and the ways of operating from using project management tools are starting to seep into law, and it's all for the better. So check out the Slack, check out Monday. Certainly, for example, here inside Docketwise, we do use Loom to communicate with other people in the company. If there's something that needs to be addressed, you make a quick video, send your team member the link to the video, and they can watch it as soon as they can get to it. And then let's see, we have a question.
Yeah, it's about moving away from a physical office and having Google reviews deleted. So Brandon, James, I don't know if you have specific advice on this. I don't personally, because I never had an office and I never relied on Google reviews, but I know how important they are, especially when it comes up on search results. So not a good answer here, but I would consider maybe you can get some sort of like a physical, like a proxy for your office. So if you rent something once a month or, at a co-working space, or maybe a PO box, although I don't know if Google Maps accepts PO boxes, but I just wonder if there are workarounds in terms of being able to have an address on Google so that your reviews come back, but without actually having to have a full office anymore. So I don't know the answer to that question, but that's a good one. I don't know if you've Googled it, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are other businesses of different types that have had this problem. I would hope that there are some good answers on the web, but yeah, sorry, Brandon, I don't have more on that. I don't know, James, if you do.
I have not had that exact scenario, but I would start with sort of looking around Google reviews and Google Maps, and they should have a help section there. And maybe there is a forum or an email address that you can ask that specific question to. I would think that if you had even a PO box or a virtual office sort of mail drop with a co-working company or something like that, that would be suitable.
Yeah. So Brandon said you have a UPS box as my office address, but Google won't allow for that. So yeah, I would think that hopefully there's someone on the Google help side that can answer that question specifically. But, listen, if let's say, and I don't want to go into this too deeply, and Brandon, I'm happy to like brainstorm this on the side, but let's say that your Google reviews are incredibly helpful and they're genuinely a source of, business leads. It might be worth it for you financially to have a once a month, a day that you spend at a co-working space that you can leverage that address and then use that for Google Maps for Google Maps. So maybe you're spending $300 a month for that, but then hopefully if the calculation is there and is right, then that $300 allows you to bring your Google reviews back, which will bring in more than $300 worth of business. So it's not the most elegant solution, but if there's no good way around it, and Google hasn't really updated their Google Maps policy for sort of the remote work life, that could be something like that is you could consider to get those reviews back.
Nadia's asked another question about having immigration forms e-signed. So Nadia, so USCIS still officially doesn't accept completely digital signatures. But we are planning on Docketwise in the not too distant future to have e-signing. I don't have a date for that yet, but it is something that we're actively planning that would allow you to have other things digitally signed.
Yeah, and of course, for now, you can use probably third-party platforms to get not the forms, but other things signed. I suppose if you really want to. Okay, cool. So we touched on. Thanks for your questions, everyone. So we touched on the website, the power of a website. I think you want to ask about email addresses, right? And again, this one seems very obvious. If you have a remote practice, I mean, if you have a physical practice, every website probably has an email address. Email is not a new thing. What I particularly think, though, about having an email address or thinking how you can think about email addresses, is to create aliases. And I think and how powerful those can be. This is a little bit of maybe an insider tip on the webinar, but when people come into your office, you can, again, build an environment for them. You make them feel that they're in a professional setting. You have maybe your diplomas hanging behind your desk, whatever it might be, a plant over on the side, a really nice receptionist that welcomes them and asks them to sit down. Like, those are very soft things that help your practice, help people feel good about you and your practice. Online, that's not the case. So like we said, you have your website, but I think that having alias email addresses such as, questions at, or info at, or clients at, website.com, maybe it might make it seem like your law firm is a bit bigger than it is, potentially, which could be a good thing. It might make people feel confident that, if they send a question to, employment questions at lawfirmx.com, maybe you have that email address, and family-based questions at lawfirmx.com. Maybe they feel that you're more likely to respond. It's a kind of a psychological trick, but I think it helps you break out sort of your law firm into teams or departments, even if in actuality it's just you, or it's you and a few people that are handling everything. So it's a small thing, but I just think it's nice to see that it creates an air of officiality to your web presence, because again, you don't have that office space where you can invite them and make them feel like, wow, I'm in a really kind of professional setting. This is a website like any other website they visit. And so doing little things like this, I think, can greatly help that.
Absolutely. All right. So I guess that brings us to telephone service. And here, one of the things is, if you're working remotely, if you're not sitting in an office with a dedicated, office landline number, you're going to be tempted to give out your personal cell phone to people. Some lawyers do that. I can think of a lot of reasons why you don't want to do that. Namely, people may call you at 11 o'clock. I mean, certainly, some people will respect your boundaries, but there are also people out there who won't, and it may not be desirable. Roman, I know that when we had talked before, you were suggesting VoIP services. Now, I used to use Vonage a long time ago, and I thought some of the advantages Vonage has would be that they had a website that you could log in and sort of, you could access all of your voicemails from the web interface. You could see who called you. They had caller ID. What do you think are the huge advantages of VoIP? Why would people want to use VoIP?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest reasons is, like you said, not to give out your cell phone number. I mean, best case scenario, it's that your clients might be kind of a little bit bothersome, and that's okay. You typically can ask a client to respect your boundaries. I mean, worst case scenario, though, you're giving out your phone number to a stranger. And the hope is that they'll be respectful and not harass you or worse, but you never know. And so I think giving folks a phone number, especially if you're practicing immigration law, you obviously, on the immigration family side, you want to make your clients feel like, taken care of. And very often giving them a phone number is like, you have me in your back pocket. But then it'll be rerouted. The phone calls and perhaps text messages can be rerouted to your phone. But by going through a third-party service provider, you are, kind of shielding yourself from that. I think, to me, that's the biggest benefit. I mean, think about it. Back in the day, you would have an office line. You would never, I mean, maybe you do, maybe some people do, but very often people call the office, right? I think here, since you don't have an office at a remote, in a remote work environment, you yeah, your cell phone is your office. And frankly, I think it's just nice to not have like an endless amount of people carrying around your cell phone number, for support purposes. And I think James, you were saying, we were chatting about this before. The addition to that, of course, is the data and the metrics you can get through VoIP. You're not going to call Verizon probably and get a dashboard of how many people called you, how long were your phone calls, et cetera. Maybe there's some ways to do that through a Verizon or an AT&T, but there certainly is more of that data through going through a VoIP platform, where you can maybe look at those metrics and say, well, how many hours am I spending on the phone? Is it my time? Is it someone else's time? Maybe you can hire someone, you can outsource the incoming phone calls, or, you can make certain decisions with that additional information.
Right. And I was going to say that one of the things that, one of the things that's a problem with giving out your cell phone is that the communication can become sort of multi-channel and fragmented. And that makes it so you have the client emailing you some things and then texting you certain other things and so forth. And it can fragment. It's better to the extent possible, you want to standardize how you do communication with the client. This is, I think, important. Because I know that, especially on the individual immigration side, the family-based side, clients can, text you pictures of documents or scans of documents, and you want to standardize it. All right. And now, do people still use, do you know about Magic Jack? Do people still use Magic Jack? Is that still a thing? You're not sure?
I don't know.
Yeah. I know people who loved it. I never got into it, but if you don't know, then I guess we can't talk about it. All right. Let's go on to video conferencing. So there's a lot of video conferencing. Did you want to?
I was going to say, Charlene says I still use it for texting. So, and they have a good mobile app. So there you go. Magic Jack, something to look into for folks.
Video conferencing has been one of the biggest changes in society since the pandemic. Zoom zoomed to the top of everybody's radar screen, but there's a lot of others. There's Google Meet, there's WebEx, there's Microsoft Teams, and a lot GoToMeetings and a lot more. Roman, what should they be looking at in terms of how to utilize video conferencing when operating remotely?
Yeah, so I have two kind of major thoughts on this. I've been using video conferencing for some time. I think, like everyone, I migrated to Zoom in the beginning of the pandemic because they were the darling, amongst this otherwise challenging time. They were one of the darling tools of, this new kind of closed pandemic world. And frankly, I thought that they were much better. It was faster, easier to log in. There weren't as many issues. There were some security questions, but for the most part, Zoom did really, really well. And so I, prior to that, was using Google Meet, and it just it didn't work for me. I didn't like it, even though I was using the Google Suite. So since then, I think a lot of those companies were spooked by Zoom. And so Microsoft put a lot of money into Teams. Google put a lot of money and resources into Meets. And those two specifically are the ones that I have now been using more and more. And so my point there is, if your law firm is using the Microsoft suite, if you're paying for, Outlook and, Word and all that kind of stuff, Teams should probably be part of your solution. And so even though there was a big migration to Zoom, for folks who are using both, look at the one that you already have, because they are quite good. My businesses, all of them run on Google. And so I have, Google Docs, I have a Gmail account, professionally, et cetera. Google Drive, that allows me to store everything in the cloud. And as part of that, I have Google Meets, and again, which was pretty bad in the beginning, but now is really good. And it's just easier. It's one click when you're creating a calendar invite with somebody. There's a lot more integration with your email and things like that. So it's a fairly obvious point, but I think some people just, they signed up for Zoom a year and a half ago and they keep using it. And then maybe it's a little bit annoying, but there's no push to kind of go back to a different platform. And here's my potential suggestion to you to look at what you might already have if you're using Google or Microsoft. So that's number one. And of course, there's WebEx, and there are Skype, and maybe you use something else. But just for the most part, think about how you can sort of start to consolidate tools and use things that are easier, that are already available to you. That's number one. Number two, the thing that I really love about video calls is being able to have transcription services either automatically baked into that video conference or using it afterwards. So I use a tool called Fireflies, fireflies.ai. Which is funny because it joins your call, your Zoom call, your Google Meets, whatever, your Teams call, as a participant. And usually everyone's like, what is this Fireflies thing? Especially if you're talking about a sensitive case or a particular matter that is not public information. But it is it's a secure transcription service that basically records your conversation. When you're done recording it, it uploads that conversation onto your dashboard on Fireflies, and you have an audio recording and a transcription of it automatically. It's done, it's transcribed via AI, which means that if there's an accent or a term or word that it might not know. For example, I use the word Ayla all the time on calls just because, for immigration folks, and it never catches it. It always says but I know what it's saying, and it's enough for me. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate. It could be 85 to 90% accurate, and I could go through it and get notes. I find that really, when I used to practice immigration law, after every email, after every phone call, I would always send an email and saying, hey, dear client, as a recap, here's what we discussed. If I got anything wrong, please let me know. You want to make sure you're kind of covering your bases by putting into words something that was spoken and then, could be argued whether or not you talked about it. Number one. Number two, to genuinely clarify whether or not you got the facts of whatever the conversation was correctly. So using tools like, Firefox, there's another one called Otter, OTTER.ai, which effectively does the same thing. You can also do a recording on Zoom. I think everyone knows how to record Zoom, but then if you want to do it subsequently, you can download the recording and upload it to a transcription service and have that transcribed if you want to have the sort of text-based version of your phone calls. So those are my two thoughts on video conferencing. Number one, it's gotten a lot better. I mean, Zoom is great, but all the others have really stepped up their game. And so if you're using Zoom, in addition to already being in the Microsoft or Google ecosystem, consider trying the Microsoft or Google version because they are quite good, and it could just decrease the clutter of the tools that you're using on a daily basis. That's number one. And number two, I would highly recommend one of these transcription services. Again, downloading the recording afterwards and getting a transcription is fine. I like having everything done automatically for me. I think I have the business version of Fireflies, which might be $30 a month, and it's unlimited storage. And so Fireflies joins virtually every call. If I don't need it, I ignore it. But if I need it and I want to go back to our conversation, I know for sure that it's there, and I don't have to scribble notes down and ask the person to stop talking while I write things down. I don't like that. I like to be present during the conversation. So I hope that's helpful. There's a lot of information.
It's a lot of information. Fireflies is a great tool. I second that. I mean, I've seen it in action, and having an automatic recap in writing of what you just discussed is priceless. All right, I want to talk about social media. This is huge because we want to allow time to talk about social media. So if you are working remotely, you will have to have a really good social media presence. This is going to be sort of more on the marketing. But let's just talk about some of the best practices. So let's imagine you're an immigration lawyer, you're working remotely. How do you want to optimize, both what you're going to spend on social media and just in terms of your time, how to best utilize social media to get yourself out there?
Yes, I mean, at a high level, so my favorite platform that I use mostly is LinkedIn, and I love it. And I proselytize LinkedIn as much as I possibly can. But I think at a high level, you have to look at the kind of work that you do, whether it's family, removal, deportation defense, et cetera, or do you work with investors or corporates or startups or what have you, and depending on that, choose the one platform that will allow you to find the prospective clients that you're looking for and focus on that platform. So again, at a high level, if you're doing the family stuff and sort of the more personal immigration, family immigration stuff, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok are definitely the way to go. That's where people are from a social media standpoint in their personal capacity. And you can really kind of build your brand, connect with people, share information, and allow them to get to know you and your brand through those channels. And then, of course, funnel them back to your website by having a link in your presence profile. Okay, so there's that. If you're on the business side of things or investor side, I think LinkedIn is number one. Twitter is also huge. Twitter has a much smaller. I think out of all the platforms, Twitter has probably one of the smallest number of users, but it's still kind of, yes, people go there professionally, but there are a lot of personally, but there are a lot of professionals there. People go there for their news. There's a lot of found business people that share their insights, and so it's got a little bit more of a professional tone to it, I think. And so that's a really great place to find business and investor and professional clients. Although I still think LinkedIn is number one for that. The other two things that I would say after figure out which of the buckets of platforms you want to choose based on the kind of work that you do is, again, just go for the one. It's overwhelming to say I have to be on Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram and whatnot. Focus on one. If you can repurpose it to another platform, great, but don't worry if you can't. Focus on the one. My focus is on LinkedIn. I repost stuff on LinkedIn, from LinkedIn rather, to Instagram and Facebook. It doesn't do as well there. I keep the people I do have there up to date with some of the stuff I'm doing, but my real energy goes towards LinkedIn because I can have genuine conversations and I build relationships. And then, of course, through some of those relationships, I can create business opportunities for myself or connect people and create value that way and say, hey, I don't do this kind of work, but why don't you talk to this person? They're really good at it. And so you're building, value that way. The last thing, so number one, figure out which bucket of social media platforms, and number two, within that bucket, go for the one platform and just focus on that, especially in the beginning. You can eventually hire someone to help out, but focus on the one platform. The third thing I would say, and I'm open to discussion on this, but I genuinely believe that if you're just starting out, especially if you're a solo practitioner or your name is on your law firm, you might have an associate or paralegal or what have you. I would focus on creating social media content through your personal account rather than through your business account first and foremost. And the reason is that if you're solo and or a small practice, people are going to come to you for you. I mean, let's be honest. An H-1B is an H-1B, right? Like a green card, a family-based green card is a family-based green card. Yes, there are better or worse lawyers if you can say that, or just ones that have a little bit more experience here and there. But for the most part, immigration lawyers it's who a client comes to first. Generally, that's who they're going to work with. So it's really hard to differentiate by saying I do H-1B visas. Well, so does thousands of other people. You can differentiate, however, based on who you are as a person, because that might be attractive to someone. Maybe it's your ethnic or religious or whatever background that your prospective clients can feel connected to. Maybe it's where you live, of course, geographically, although now that we're talking about being remote, that might not be as relevant, although you can still be in Boise, Idaho, and have a remote practice. But if your clients are from Boise, Idaho, and they know that the area and whatever, they might feel comfortable with that, right? It could be your geographic location. It could be, of course, languages that you speak. It could be, if you work on extraordinary ability, visas for performing artists, maybe you were a performing artist back in college and you might share that about yourself. So the idea is share something about yourself personally and have your prospect connect with that. And then that is going to be a really big contributing factor to them reaching out to you versus another lawyer that they might find through Avo or just through a random Google search.
And I wanted to mention that for the LinkedIn, it's really, it's you want to have the discipline to create content with whatever channel. If it's Facebook, if you're finding potential clients through Facebook and you find your Facebook posts are getting traction, you want to have the discipline. I think that with LinkedIn, it's not just about connecting with everybody under the sun. It's about producing content. It's about having a discipline to set aside time every week and write a short piece every week, or whenever you can fit it in, and give it a couple of months to see how it is working out. It's better to do, as Roman said, and it's so true, it's better to do one thing or a couple of things well than to spread yourself too thin. And then what happens is you get frustrated, you can't keep up with everything, and then it doesn't work out.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and have it so that if if people are making contact with you through social media, you can easily facilitate them scheduling an appointment. You want to have a link ready to give them to your calendar so they can easily book the appointment through social media channels. And yeah, I mean, in terms of emphasizing your own qualities, that's a super important point. I mean, I can't tell you the number of clients when I was practicing, the number of clients that I had who chose me because they said that, well, we just connected with your personality. We had a previous lawyer. We felt that they weren't listening to us. They weren't giving us enough time and so forth. But with you, we always felt that you're really listening to us. You're really taking the time and so forth. And that's huge. So your personal attributes are what makes you stand out. And you always want to play to your strengths. If your strengths are that you are a great speaker and you inspire confidence in people, then emphasize that in your social media, in your videos or your posts. Inspire confidence if that's what you do well. If you're great at sounding like an authority, then do that. But always put yourself out there in your best light, and that's what people are attracted to.
I hope folks have questions on this, because I definitely love discussing this topic. So if you do have questions, or if they're ruminating, just put them out there. But I want to say two things. Number one, putting yourself in the best light is really important professionally. However, I do think that you can share vulnerabilities, right? You can share something about your life, as an attorney or as a professional or whatever, the challenges that you've gone through, maybe an early day, early in your career, maybe you experienced the loss of a client and here's what you learned, or whatever it might be, because I think that humanizes us as well. People very much relate to others' challenges and difficulties much more so than they relate to their wins and successes. So it's just one thing I would say, like, you can talk about the thing that you're an expert in, and then you can also share something of like, hey, in the beginning, I remember I took on a case that was an EB-5 case because I thought this is going to bring me a ton of money, but I knew that I was passionate about, green card and naturalization for families. And I took the EB-5 case, and like, it was okay, but I hated it. I was stressed out. It was so much back and forth with the client. I didn't realize the kind of, work it would entail. And so I decided after that I'm not going to take on cases that I know I don't love. Right. So you're kind of sharing, I made that up, but like, you're kind of sharing, someone who wrote that would be sharing a story of a challenge that they went through, maybe what they learned about. And it's not that post in and of itself says that you're an expert in something, but it shares a story. It gives people something to relate to. And it does subconsciously say, hey, I'm an expert in family-based green cards and naturalization. And I very confidently turn away or refer out work that I know doesn't fit what I am an expert in, what my firm is an expert in. And that subconsciously shows that you are an expert in the thing that you say you do. And so I want to point that out because it's really easy to do on social media by sharing some of these sort of vulnerable stories, in addition to your thought leadership, in addition to your wins, in addition to like legal updates or what have you. The last thing I wanted to say from a social media perspective, and I don't know all of the folks here who are listening, and obviously for people who are listening afterwards when it's not live, if you're not on social media, or if you are passively, one way that I like to think about it, whether it's LinkedIn or Instagram or anywhere else, is that it's basically kind of a 24/7, 365 networking conference. And depending on who your content is made to be valuable to, it's a different type of conference. So for example, when I share content about, how I think immigration lawyers should think or should approach marketing on LinkedIn, right? And I share a post about that. My audience for that post are immigration practitioners. And so I get comments from immigration practitioners. And so for that period of time, when I'm replying to those comments, it's kind of like I'm at a mini ALA event with other practitioners, or paralegals or whoever in the practice. And they are, we're discussing things about social media with regards to their firm. Other times, I might share something that is specific to in-house HR, right? In-house immigration. Because with Laborless, we support in-house immigration teams with their H-1B stuff. And so there are thoughts that I have about that. And I very often have in-house HR and hiring and immigration folks who are replying to me there. So in that moment, I'm kind of like at a SHRM conference or a worldwide ERC conference or some other HR conference talking to people. And I say this because a lot of people are like, oh, social media, I'm busy. Like, what do I have to do? I go like stuff. Like, what am I going to write? It's just a big thing. And I think about it in terms of like, well, when you go to a conference, what's your mindset there? Okay, let me go and just meet people. I'll share a little bit about myself. I'll comment about something someone else is saying. I'll ask another person I meet there a question. All of those different types of interactions end up in people exchanging business cards and building relationships. I look at LinkedIn the same way. And you could say that about other platforms. If you're not feeling it that day and you don't want to post anything, go and look at your friends' posts and see what they're writing and just comment on it and say, hey, James, thanks so much for sharing that latest update on Docketwise. Like, I think this is a really cool tool. I've been waiting for it for a long time. Great. Right. And I just had that little conversation with you, James, online. And it's as if we're at a legal tech conference. So I wanted to put that as like a mindset shift of, social media is not just about, a one-way conversation where you're the one who always has to post. You can spend days on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram and not post a thing, but still get a lot of value out of it by interacting with other people's content, asking them a question in the comments, sending a direct message and saying, hey, I just read your article. It's great. I'd love to learn a little bit more, whatever it might be. So start thinking about it from the human side.
Absolutely. Great advice there. All right. Well, we talked before about the ability to hire people in different locations if you're operating remotely. But if you want to do that, where do you go to find the talent, right? Let's say you're casting your net wide, you're open to hiring people wherever they're located. They may even be in another country. And are there sites where you can go to look for your prospective employees? Do you know of any, Roman?
Well, so it depends. I mean, if you're looking for an attorney, obviously you can go through the ALA. You can post a job board. I'm sorry, you can post a job opening on the ALA job board. You can use LinkedIn, all these sort of regular places. If you're looking for more administrative staff, you can look on places like Upwork and similar types of kind of gig worker platforms where folks can come in and work for you on a project basis or on a temporary basis. And you could probably always hire them directly as well. There's also the idea of, I've just seen this growing in popularity, kind of part-time paralegals that are virtual and that work with a number of attorneys who, of course, either focus on immigration or maybe focus on your specific type of work within immigration. So that's a nice way of doing it as well, where you're not actually going out and interviewing people for a full-time position. You're interviewing someone who can come in and augment your staff virtually, who already works virtually. And so they're okay using Slack, they're okay using Loom, it's, email is okay for them, et cetera. And go about it that way. And of course, if you're hiring full-time paralegals, I would say the same as an ALA, as the lawyer suggestion, which would be to post jobs on job boards and ask your network. I will say one of the things that I love about social media, I was hiring someone recently. I didn't post it, or rather I didn't use any job boards. I just went on LinkedIn and I said, hey, everyone, here's what I need. I put a little picture up of kind of the main bullet points, and folks commented and sent me messages and said, here, what about this person? Or, hey, I'm interested. And I ended up getting, a network, a referral base through my network rather than just totally random folks coming in through, a job site. So I hope that's kind of helpful.
Yeah, I want to just mention Upwork is a great site where for outsourcing work. And there are people, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a place where people who do contract work or temp work, or maybe for ongoing gigs, it's basically gig workers, and they post their profile and they have references and they list their skills and so forth and what their typical rates are. And then you can engage them for a project basis. You don't have to, make an ongoing commitment, but you can, make an agreement to pay a certain rate per week or per project, and you set the terms, and then they agree to it, and they get paid through Upwork. You put your card on file and so forth, and the payment to the employee is handled through Upwork and so forth. So that's a great site that I recommend looking into. The old sites are still good sites, Monster, Indeed, all of those. And as Roman said, reaching out directly to colleagues through social media and let them know what you're looking for. All great strategies. Let me see if we have any questions.
Yeah, we have a question from Jacqueline about suggestions, recommendations on translation services for created content. So Fireflies, I know that they're coming out with a transcription service that will also understand Spanish. Obviously, because their service is automated, you can, it has to just know the language. So that's, I guess, why they started with English. I think rev.com allows for multi-language transcription. So you can upload, let's say, if you're talking about translating, or rather if you're talking about transcribing content that's audio or video that's in a different language, you can use that. I mean, for just translating documents, I don't know of any like specific sites that will help you translate your kind of blogs and things like that, but I'm sure there are plenty.
I've had luck. Yeah, I mean, I think Fiverr is a good place. You can find people who are independent translators who can do perfectly acceptable work, and some of them even do certified translations, particularly if you give them the form of the certificate that they need to sign. But there are a whole plethora of people of practically any language that you can want on Fiverr. And I mean, if you use a professional, if you use sort of an established translation company as such, that's going to be a lot more expensive. And I can think of a couple names, but I won't. I'm not going to put them out here. Let me see what else. No, we don't have any other questions. Let's talk about case management. So case management is super important to begin with, but when you're practicing remotely, it becomes absolutely critical. So we talked about this a little earlier, the combination of using a case management tool, which allows you to create a workflow and assign forms, tasks, notes, events to your staff, and then perhaps also having a project management solution to complement that you want to use for other things as well, or using an in-office sort of tool like Slack for doing some in-office communication. On Docketwise, for example, we have, you can assign a lot of different resources to your individual staff members and manage through Docketwise. You can assign forms, meaning who is the questionnaire assigned to in this office to complete, or among your staff to complete. If you write a note, if you take a note and you assign that to a particular employee because they have to take action on it, they get a notification. You can assign notes, you can assign tasks, you can add tasks in individually, you can add in lists of tasks that you've made up in advance. We even provide you with some starter lists for different types of cases to help you get started with it. You're going to want to eventually combine that with your workflows. Your workflows is where you're actually setting out how the case is supposed to proceed. You're setting up a type of case and dividing it into steps and estimating a time frame for completing each step. And then for each step of the case, you can have, two actions occurring automatically. You can have a set of tasks that have been written in advance, go into the matter for that stage of the case. You can have an outgoing email to the client for that stage of the case. You can also set it up to where the tasks that are put into the matter are assigned to the same person or people who the actual matter is assigned to. So those are all ways that you can, utilize the case management for managing the staff. Roman, you want to talk a little bit about, you want to add to that, or talk about case management in general, high level?
I mean, you guys are the experts, obviously, on that. I think it's important. It goes without saying that every law firm should have a system. I do know, of course, folks at if people are here, on this webinar or watching this, obviously they at least know what Docketwise is and what a case management platform is. But I also, I follow some immigration lawyers, let's say on Instagram, who are quite literally just getting started. And it's, a couple of cases word of mouth. Maybe they're fresh out of law school, or maybe they're just doing some stuff on the side and leaving their firms, and they just haven't adopted a system yet because they haven't really scaled. Maybe they're doing one case every 2 months, just getting by. So I think it goes without saying, but if you're one of these folks who's at the very beginning, looking at case management from the get-go is really, really important. Like, set up the foundation for your firm from the beginning, versus having spreadsheets and documents all over the place and then trying to like put this round peg into the square hole later on. I've been there, not with the case management point of view, but for a CRM, I have a spreadsheet that I've been using forever, and now I'm just finally getting onto what is it called?
Salesforce.
No, yeah. Well, anyways, one of those. Like, that's the point. I forgot because I'm like very much stalling getting everything, and it's, I have to transfer the data and all that stuff. The one thing that I would note is I do also hear a lot of law firms talk about data migration. I actually ran a poll on this a few months ago, and I asked, if you're an immigration lawyer and you're looking to leave your current case management platform and come onto another, what would be the biggest impediment to doing so? And overwhelmingly people said data migration. And I don't know if it's because some of them were, some systems export data in a really dirty way, so that, it creates like a moat between, it kind of keeps people on their platform. But I would say that go through the pain of, if you have to, of migrating. If you're not happy with the platform, go through the pain and, look at some of the newer ones. Obviously, this is a Docketwise webinar, so like, I want to plug you guys, but so for folks who might be using something that's a little bit older school that maybe they're not happy with, or if they're not doing anything at all and they're using a spreadsheet, I just highly recommend signing up for a case management platform and like setting your law firm up for success.
Absolutely. I mean, back in the day, people used to just say, well, you only need one of those, form solutions or case management solutions if you're doing like a large volume of cases or whatever. And it was more the larger firms that had them. Those days are long gone. That has not been the case for more than 10 or 15 years. Any lawyer, a solo lawyer, needs a good web-based case management system. There's just you just shouldn't be doing it other than that. In terms of data migration, let me talk about that, because we handle this every day here at Docketwise. I mean, with data migration, essentially, you're providing you're going to obtain your data from your old platform in a sort of an electronic file of some sort. And a lot of times that's what we call a CSV file, which is essentially a giant spreadsheet with the clients listed and then the client attributes, like the individual bits of information about each client. Their first name, middle name, last name, date of birth, social security number, A number, and so on and so forth. You might have hundreds of columns in the spreadsheet with all these data points. And then what the people at the new case management platform, us in this case, have to do is take those data points and map them to the corresponding fields in Docketwise, let's say, and bring your data over so that it's in the right fields, and then can auto-populate and allow you to create forms and things in Docketwise. And we're extremely successful at doing that. We do that from all manner of other platforms. The various platforms that are out there, we've pretty much all done data migration from them. And we have a basic data migration, which are the clients, the matters, and the client attributes, meaning the different pieces of information. If you also needed what we call the additional items, which would be your notes, tasks, calendar events, or your attached documents, if you've got those elsewhere and you need to bring those over, we offer a premium migration. So talk to us about it. Talk to our customer success team. Get over the fear of doing it. We're excellent at doing that. We work with you closely. If you have any concern about that, we're going to discuss it with you. If we've done the migration and you have any question about it afterwards, we're always happy to go back and discuss what we've done with you and improve it, do our level best to get it as perfect as it can be. So don't be afraid of that.
Amen.
Amen. Okay. All right. Well, let's see. Do we have any other questions in the chat? I don't think we do. All right. Well, it's been extremely great, this webinar, and I think this has been really. We have a blog article up on the Docketwise blog covering a lot of the same points, and another blog article on the automated transcription services that we discussed. So please review those. Also, when we post the video of today's webinar, we'll put in some links to some of the services that we talked about today. But and please, when we post that, please give it a like. Please write comments and tell us, what your experience has been with working remotely, because we want to hear from you. And yeah. All right. So thanks very much to Roman Zelichenko, founder of GMI Rocket and also of Laborless, for being with us today. Thanks again to Chris Williams for engineering today's webinar. And we're looking forward to seeing all of you at our next webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining.